Hey, my friends, Mary Rose here. It's Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time, and that is my usual time to go live on YouTube and in the Facebook group for Path of the Storyteller, talk about writing craft, talk about story structure, talk about the mindset that it takes to develop as an artist, to be a successful writer. But today I'm going to talk about me. And so obviously I'm much more flustered and nervous and feel far more unprepared than I usually do. Usually I just come on and share what I do. But this is a very special live stream today because I'm replying to a question that one of the members of the Facebook group asked. And I realized that I needed to move outside of my comfort zone, which is what we all must do in life and in story, and answer this question because I think it's a good one. She basically wanted to know how I learned to write, how I got through all of the obstacles, the learning the craft, learning story structure, the forces of resistance, those threshold guardians that we talk about sometimes when we talk about story structure. She wanted to know how I did it and how that might be evident in my work, if there was a way to, even trace my development in my work, which is incredibly flattering. And I appreciated the question. But I also realized that this question of how did you do it? What's your story? In other words, gets posed to writers who have achieved a certain amount of, success. Here come my air quotes. In the public realm, in the marketplace, we're published, we have readers. To a lot of people, that's a powerful marker of success. It seems almost unattainable to many would-be writers. So the question of what's your story? How did you get here? What brought you from where you started to where you are, and hopefully where I continue to go? I recognize how compelling that question is because people ask it all the time. And I think part of what's compelling is that there's a curiosity about how one might learn from my journey, learn from my mistakes, and see how it applies to one's own journey. And what I'm going to share with you today is uncensored and unvarnished, kind of surprising and circuitous tale, if you will, of how I ended up writing fiction, even though I did not set out to write fiction. And it was the last thing on my mind for many, many, many years. But I did end up doing it. I continued to do it. I do consider it my mission, my highest calling. It's sort of why I'm here. So it's what I'm supposed to do, this go round on the old planet. And it's a really interesting journey. And there's something about the journey of a writer, any artist developing, I should say, that just as most of our lives tend to do, draw from and mirror the exact content of story structure. And it's not because we are turning our lives into stories out of boredom. It's because story structure actually is a pretty accurate map of how humans grow and develop. And that's why it works so well for us when we're telling stories. So before I begin, let me just wave hello to the folks who are here watching live. I'm very pleased to have you here. Terry, hello. Chris, hello. Cynthia, hello. We've got past, present, and future Path of the Storyteller students in the room. And I could not be more excited about that. The program is open for enrollment, by the way, and I posted a link to the enrollment page in the material just underneath the video on YouTube. But you can just go to www.pathofthestoryteller.com/enroll. That shouldn't be hard to remember, right? If you want to learn more about the program, we just opened up enrollment today, and I am so excited. Enrollment's going to stay open through Monday night. So we've got some time to answer questions and all that stuff, but you got to let me know you're interested. So go to the enrollment page and take a peek, all right? So portrait of the artist as a young girl growing up on Long Island. That's what we're here for. Although I'm going to start there and take you to the present. So, I want to say that that the hero's journey, what I'm about to tell you is going to have the shape of a hero's journey, and that's the piece of it that you can replicate, right? And I'm going to try and draw that out for you so that you can get some benefit out of the therapy session that I'm about to share with you. And I just want to remind you that one of the qualities of the hero's journey is that there is a central figure who is on a difficult mission, trying to get somewhere in life. They may not be heading in the right direction, but they're heading in the best direction that they know to go. And that along the way, they are beset with what? Ice cream cones and cupcakes? No, they're beset with obstacles, failures. That's most of it. That's what it is. That's what a story is. It's your hero in pursuit of a goal beset with obstacles. They've got to get past. It's, you know, it's like one of those horse races where you just got, each time you jump over a fence, you've got to jump over another one. So the journey is mostly failure until when? Until it all comes together in the end. That is a kind of a shape of a journey. So I just wanted to tell you that I'm not a person that likes to dwell on the negative, complain. I don't like to give that a lot of power or a lot of space in my life, but I think that I need to share with you what these obstacles were so that you understand how this is, in fact, a hero's journey. There's a point in our lives and in our writing to all of these failures and obstacles. And the point is this: each time our hero comes up against the edge of what they think is possible, the edge of their comfort zone, and tries to level up a little bit, does whatever it takes to get through that moment of the story, that's where they pick up the tools they need. They may not know why they need them, but that's where all the magic rings and, enchanted swords, I'm speaking symbolically here, the insights, the capacity, the self-knowledge, it's where all of the goodies are earned. They are earned in the moments of failure. They're earned in the moments of trial and obstacle. So that's where you pick up the tools you need. And it's when we get to the end of the story where it all comes together like a beautiful puzzle of a satisfying ending that both hero and reader discover that they were exactly the tools that were needed. So bear that in mind as I tell this tale. I want to start out by just giving you a little frame of what kind of origins I had. Every superhero has an origin story, right? So I'm no superhero, but this is mine. I was a middle child of I would say working class family is a fair description, on Long Island. And I was born in 1962. So I was a child of the 60s and the 70s. And my parents were not college educated. They were not bookish people. We were not part of any kind of cultural elite. Just so you know, you would not look at this family and say, aha, from this, a novelist will spring. Okay. This was not that. It was not that. Nor was I one of those kids who wrote a lot. I liked to read. I was a strong and early reader. But I was never, oh, look who's coming to keep me company. My little friend here. You've all met Ralph by now. He knows I'm a little nervous today, so he's going to come. He's going to come bolster my spirits. I spend, as you can imagine, as a writer of middle grade fiction, I have wonderful, wonderful interactions with, avid readers, those bright 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds who are, reading my kinds of books, and I hear from them all the time. And some of them are prodigious writers. Some of them are skillful, and they know already that their mission in life, their calling in life is to be writers. That was not me. That kind of imagining a life, doing something like writing was outside the type of lives that I could imagine based on my upbringing. I think you guys know what I mean. I also had a kind of a traumatic first memory of what it meant to be a writer, which I will quickly share with you because it's kind of hilarious. I was quite young, perhaps, I don't know, maybe second grade or third grade. And I was pondering, as I was wont to do even as a young child, something sad that had seized my imagination. And it was this: how sad it was. How sad it was when a Christmas tree was over and it was dead and you had to put it out at the curb. It was like the celebrity of the family all through the month of December. But then come January, it was all dried up and you had to put it out with the trash. This haunted me as a kid. You know, this is the kind of thing that really bugged me. So I wrote a story about it from the perspective of the tree. And I was a little kid. This wasn't really like an assignment for school. It was, you know, just I wrote about it and I drew pictures and I put the pictures in the story together. And so far so good, right? But then I made the life-changing choice to show it to one of my teachers, thinking like, oh, look, you wrote a story. There's some pictures. Way to go. You know, awesome. That's not what happened. It got received in a kind of a suspicious way. There was a wariness. There was a kind of a lack of enthusiasm about it, which I didn't fully understand. And very soon, the teacher started to ask me questions about what I had written. And they were not like, oh, amazing. Like, you know, I love Christmas trees too. Where do you know, what do you think about that? It was more like, where did you get the idea for the character names? What made you think of this scene? And I very quickly realized that, because kids are always so much more savvy than we grown-ups sometimes remember that they are, very quickly realized that they thought I had stolen it. This was an accusation of plagiarism, nothing less. Can you imagine how offended I was? They thought that I had copied it from somewhere. I was even sent to have a private conversation with a strange man who probably was like the school psychologist or somebody. I to this day, I don't know who he was, but I was sent to have a conversation with him about it. I think they might have given me some sort of strange tests. You can imagine from an adult's perspective that they were trying to sort out, like, you know, something about me that seemed evident, that seemed unusual. But from the child's perspective, all I learned, what did I get from this experience? Writing is going to draw attention to me in a way that I do not like. Now, I want you to remember that, because the first act of any hero's journey is a depiction of a hero in a circumstance that is not suitable for their full blossoming, right? Nobody writes a story or wants to read a story about the village of the happy, nice people in which nothing is wrong. There are no obstacles. Everything is just in a state of fulfillment. Like, that's the Garden of Eden. That's the beginning of the story. It's not the end, right? This is what happens in stories. So this was the kind of imperfect soil in which I was planted. And I took that memory of the danger, the absolute danger of writing, to heart in a way that took 30 years to revisit. So stay tuned. There's a lot that happens in my hero's journey. I'm going to try to, go quick and just give you the high points. Now, I read at home. So the story of the Christmas tree book aside, I was an avid reader, and I found reading to be something very safe to do and very private to do. And I read a lot, but we were not a family that we had shelves and shelves and shelves of books. We had books, and, all due props to my darling mom, who, was not a highly educated woman. That she didn't even get to go to a real high school. She went to secretarial high school, which is a thing that they did to girls in those days. She didn't need academics. She just needed to learn how to type fast so she could support herself. And in fact, she did. But she knew that she should have books in the house, and she had some, and I have one of them here, and I may have shown this to you guys before. This is the actual book. As a kid, you could see it's absolutely, falling apart. It's out of its binding. It's quite dirty. Lived in her basement for decades. The Golden Treasury of Children's Literature, edited and selected by the Untermeyers, Brynne and Louis Untermeyer. This was a book that I probably read and reread and reread so many times, partly because I liked it, and partly because there wasn't a ton of, selection. And from this book, we'll call it an early bit of mentor energy, right? this book is filled with the golden age of British children's literature. It's filled with Kipling. It's got Winnie the Pooh, Lewis Carroll, poetry. It's got all that groovy stuff, right? Now, that is a very kind of classical, you might say, old-fashioned selection. But, this is the late 1960s, and this was a very high-quality anthology just in terms of its literary merit at the time. Anybody who knows my work can laugh aloud right now at understanding just how deeply imprinted by this reading I was. This is what we call mentor energy. I didn't have to be in a family, right, that was educated at Oxford, that had Ivy League degrees. As long as I was given an anthology of the best children's literature, right, that the Untermeyers could put between hardcovers, it did the trick. So that also made an impression. So too early, like footprints in the sand, right? Like writing is dangerous. It's just going to draw people's attention to you. But also look how great it is. Look how great it can be. Had a wonderful, tuning of the ear, even at a very early age, work that was just filled with whimsy, the imagination, animal characters, governesses, Mary Poppins, right? I mean, so many things that I read at that age. One of the other things that we had in our house, and again, thanks to my mom's attempts always to try to give something to her bright and curious children. They used to have encyclopedias at the supermarket. And if you went to the supermarket often enough, you got I think a coupon that you could get another volume of the encyclopedia, but they only sold them one at a time. And sometimes they switched which encyclopedia it was. Anybody my age who knows about this, you can vouch for the fact that this was a crazy thing that they used to do. So we had a couple of different sets of encyclopedias in the house, but none of them that had all the volumes. Just sort of partial. If you wanted to know something that started with the letter M, you were out of luck, right? But this was also recreational reading for me. And so, I kind of cobbled together knowing a lot about a little bit about a lot of different things, which is an extremely useful grounding for a writer. So in spite of myself, the storytelling gods are kind of filling the well with things, even though the environment we're still in the first act. We are still in the first act. So I was not bookish generating writing when I was young. I gravitated to music. And what I got from gravitating to music in comparison to the story about the Christmas tree is very important, which is that I got to be in a creative realm. I got to be take a bath of aesthetic pleasure, right? But I got to do it in a crowd. I was in a choir. I was in the orchestra. It was not about being called in and saying, wait a minute, how did you think of those characters? Are you sure you thought of them yourselves? It's not something you read in a book, right? So it was my artistic spirit, what was resonating with me, just trying to find a way to be while also feeling safe. So that's my childhood in a nutshell. Let's move forward now. Let's sort of fast forward. This first act of it can't go on like this. There's this quality, right, in the first act where our hero has longings, has stuff that's not being expressed, and they're in an environment where it's not working so well. It's not where they can truly bloom and grow. And so the call to adventure comes. For me, the call to adventure was when I was in high school and I discovered the theater. Like so many odd kids, the drama club saved me. Do props to the drama club kids out there. You know who you are. Now, listen, I was not an extrovert. I was not a person that wanted to get up on stage and draw attention to myself at all. I was smart and I was, introverted, and I was a little weird. And I saw, however, that by getting into the drama club, a possibility of being in a play, that I could move outside of my comfort zone and be closer to what I had loved so much, which was the aesthetic experience, a transportive experience of story. In all my reading, I was going through these incredible journeys of stories, right? How do you get to be in a book? You get in the play. You put on the costume, you be the character, you do it. Now, little did I know what tools I was learning that was, preparation for my later career as a novelist. I was literal minded. I just literally thought, okay, I can be in the show. I can be the character. That is a way to be closer to the thing that gives me so much joy, so much satisfaction, the story. So my very first part in a high school play was a small part because I was literally this like quiet kid in the back of the room. So of course they weren't going to give me a big part, but it turned out that I was fearless as long as I was pretending to be someone else. Right. And so all of a sudden there was this, wait a minute, is that her? That's a kid who sits, sits and never says anything, emoting, tearing it up on stage. It was me. And it was a really transformative experience because all of a sudden I was getting attention, which was a little, right, scary, but I was getting attention, not personally, but because it was a performance. And so once again, we see what we call in story structure, what I call in the Path of the Storyteller program, the inside dragon. There's an outside dragon to battle, but there's usually an inside dragon as well. Like, what is that inside wound that the hero is really struggling with? And you still see the theme of like, I'm wanting to get the attention that's due me, but I'm uncomfortable because I don't know if it's going to be positive attention. I'm not really able to do it, but now I've got a way to do it that I can put on a costume. Amazing, right? So it's a little step forward. And I took a step outside my comfort zone, and this was the consequence. My involvement, my love for the theater that I discovered and then exploded in my teen years, put me in, at first, we'll call it spiritual contact, but later, miraculously, actual contact with one of the great mentors of my life, who is the composer lyricist, Stephen Sondheim. And anybody who knows musical theater has heard of Stephen Sondheim. If you haven't heard of him, that's all right. You can go find out who he is, or you could just listen to me explain to you why he's so amazing. He's still alive and has had an incredible life and leaves us an incredible body of work. Sondheim kind of revolutionized the way that musical theater was conceived of and written, and the kinds of topics and subject matters that could be treated in a musical. His brilliance at character and his use of wordplay in the writing of lyrics are, there's before Sondheim and after Sondheim in the theater. It was just one of those huge moments in the development of this particular art form, American musical theater. And I had, by the time I got out of high school, pretty much memorized his entire body of work. Now, when Shakespeare went to school, they had to memorize all the Greek plays, right? They had to memorize all the Roman poetry. They had to do a lot of memorization. I was not, I did not have anything more than a Long Island public school education. But I memorized the works of Stephen Sondheim, and it was just about like committing half the works of Shakespeare to memory. It imprinted me. It taught me amazing. I want to tell you. So part of our hero's journey metaphor here is that each time I stepped out of my comfort zone, just naively, like, this is just what I want to do next. It feels good, or it feels less bad, whatever it is that makes us make the choices we make in life. I got tools. I didn't know what I was going to use them for, but I stuck them in my pocket. And I want to tell you the tools that I got from my teenage obsession with Sondheim. I got an incredible exposure to how to delineate character, because this was something that he's an absolute genius at. I got a masterclass in how to tell story through dialogue, because this is the thing about the theater, of course. We don't have pages and pages of narration in the theater. It's all characters doing and talking. It's characters behaving, taking actions through speech. And in a musical, of course, they sing as well. And so what gets added to that is that in order to turn dialogue, spoken dialogue, into song lyrics, there is an elevated control of the language, because it's not just getting a character to say what they mean. It's getting the character to say what they mean, right, in 12 syllables with the emphasis on the 7th one, and the 12th syllable has to end in a vowel. Like, that's what lyricists do, right? They have to write so that it sits on the music seamlessly, so that there's no gap, there's no light showing between the music and the lyrics, what a really good lyricist does. That level of microscopic attention to language is possibly the main thing that Sondheim taught me, that my exposure to Sondheim taught me. All right. So this is important stuff. My little bag of tools. I don't even know where I'm going in life. And honestly, the thought of being a novelist has not even occurred to me yet. But I have this little duffel bag of tools that the storytelling gods are saying, you're going to need this. You're going to need this. You're going to need this too. Just trust us. You're going to need this. So I crossed a huge threshold, as many do after high school. I did go to college for a little while. And I did choose a path that was daring. I chose to go to NYU to live in the big scary city. And I also chose to study acting, which was madness, right? Because again, I was not from one of those families where someone could kiss me on the head and say, oh, go be an artist. You know, we'll take care of you financially. No. It was a really, really crazy thing to do. And, you know, only the sort of tragedy that was going on in my family at the time, my father was dying of cancer, kind of kept enough attention off of me that nobody stopped me. I think if more people had been paying attention, someone might have tried to stop me, but nobody did. So I went to NYU, 17 years old, living in the city, and I was put in the Lee Strasberg Institute to study acting, and that was just a partnership that NYU had. Now, I mentioned Lee Strasberg Institute by name, Lee Strasberg Studio, because it is a very particular place to study acting. It's not the type of study that you would get just anywhere. And it was, in a sense, the worst possible place, but also the best possible place to send me, because it was all psychological. It was all about exposure. It was all about, like, you working with the self. It was extremely intimate and psychological. And the kid who had learned that drawing attention to herself could, you know, not go well, was really, really challenged by this. And I lasted a year at Strasberg, and then I asked to go someplace else where I would be less challenged, because that was a kind of a refusal of the call. I was like, no, my comfort zone is I'm too far outside of it. So, but I did learn something during that very difficult year at the Lee Strasberg Studio. And I want to tell you what they are, because I use these tools every day in my writing. The Strasberg Institute teaches method acting, which you may have heard of. And one of the qualities of method acting is that we as actors use sense memory, sensory details, in order to activate emotions from our own past, so that we can have in our bodies a truthful experience of emotion that we can bring to our performances, so that we're not just pretending. We're not indicating and faking it like, oh, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. Now, we sit there and we smell in our memory, like we conjure the memory of what it felt like, what it smelled like, what it sounded like, you know, what was I wearing? It's like a self-hypnosis, if that makes sense. During this time in my life when I was grief-stricken or terrified or overcome with joy or whatever it was. And so that we can get not just the intellectual, but the bodily sensation of the emotion. And then we can bring that to our performances. Now, those of you who, you know, watch incredible actors on film, you must marvel, right? Like, how do they not just say the lines, but you can just tell in their body, they're experiencing the feelings, right? This is one of the great techniques. Now, this insight, that sensory detail, is the key to activating emotion. Hold that thought, friends, because that is an essential part of writing craft. I use it all the time, and it's something we have a whole lesson about in the Path of the Storyteller program. The other thing that the Strasberg year impressed upon me, which I teach as well, is that characters have bodies. Characters have bodies, and so much of writing good fiction, I now know, has to do with our ability to imagine and depict the physical experience. It's not about the words. It's about using the words to manifest a sense of embodiment of sensory reality. It is truly a kind of hypnosis. I learned that by taking class for a year that I hated. I hated this class so much at the Strasberg Institute. So I have to say thank you, method acting. I did not know how valuable you were going to be later in life. Let's follow that with another huge call to adventure. And I just want to point out to those of you who thought I was going to say, oh, I learned story structure in this class and I learned writing craft in this class. I've never taken a class in fiction writing. I lived a hero's journey and I got a duffel bag stuffed full of tools. That's what my story is about, just so you know. Huge call to adventure while I was still in college. I've told this story many times. I recently told it at length on a podcast that I can link to in the notes below. But it's such an unbelievable story that I don't want to tell it too quickly because you'll think I'm making it up. But after my teenage obsession with Stephen Sondheim, there I am at the second year of college immediately, just a few months after my father did finally pass away. So obstacles, this was not a smooth path. I went to an open call for a Broadway musical, an open call meaning that anybody could walk in off the street. And I was literally anybody walking in off the street. I was 18 years old. I had no age and I had no professional experience whatsoever, but I did have an obsession with Stephen Sondheim. That was enough to get me through the door because I had no business being there. I just want to make that really clear. I had no business going to this audition, but it was an open call and they wanted young people. And so I went. I was one of thousands of young people who showed up. And it is a really hilarious and long story how I ended up a couple of months later getting the job. But I was one of a group of people. And I want to shout out to my darling friend, Terry, who's here watching this live because she was there at this part of my life. And she too was one of that group of people who got very improbably cast in a new Broadway musical that was going to be written by Stephen Sondheim. And now my encounter with my fantasy mentor as a teenager, like literally I was in the room with the person that I had imagined. So, it sounds so improbable because it is. But I got in that show. That show was it was a literal call to adventure, as is being noted in the comments, and I accepted it. But I have never been so scared in my life. I never had such imposter syndrome in my life. And I was in the room with the mentor that I worshipped above all. Now, did I learn from Stephen Sondheim how to write novels? No, but let me tell you what I did learn. I learned that artists, even great artists, even famous artists, even, iconic artists are just people. They are not any different than anybody else because I got to meet my idols and work with them when I was still very young. I learned how much work it is to create good art. I learned that revision doesn't end until the piece works. And I say that because those of you who might know a little bit of the story of the show is that it opened in New York in previews and the entire world thought it was going to be the greatest musical of all time. It was going to be, it was going to win all the prizes and it was going to run forever. And it was a catastrophic failure artistically and critically, and it closed very quickly. So the whole time we were doing it, these geniuses were up all night revising and throwing new scenes at us, new pages at us. They revised and revised and they revised until they couldn't revise anymore, So I learned something about revision. I learned that a piece of storytelling doesn't work until it works for the audience. That we sometimes don't know ourselves what's working, and that when we put it out in front of others and they say, I don't get it, like listen to them. So that think of all of these valuable tools ending up in my little toolkit, my little hero's journey toolkit. I learned that failure is inevitable. that no matter how good you are and how successful you are and how hard you work and how much you revise, that failure is a thing that will happen. It doesn't mean you go home. It's just part of it. And then I learned two things that I think are really, really important. I became obsessed because of the failure of Marilee. I became obsessed with why things work and why they don't work. I developed a kind of a critical eye. I wanted to know what was wrong with the show. I was watching my idols revise, and sometimes I was thinking, why are they changing that? Why aren't they changing this? I think this is what's not working, but I was just a kid in the cast, so I didn't have any input on this. But I became so curious. I became so curious about why things work and why they don't. And so this added another layer to the way I thought about storytelling. All right. And I would say the other thing that I learned, the experience of being picked as an unknown person, unknown young person out of literally thousands of young people who came to audition for this show, and being picked by my idol, my mentor, my Gandalf, if you will, right? Being picked and saying, no, 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 you're one of us. Come, you're one of us. I cannot tell you what a difference that made to me, because even though the show was a failure, and even though I didn't end up being an actor very much longer than that, I had a few little more experiences, but just having that special dose of mentor energy, if you can imagine how special that is, it felt like I got the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. I was told, you're still a baby, you don't know what you're doing, but there is a place for you at the table. You are part of the community of artists. You're one of us. You're part of this tradition. Now it's up to you to figure out what that place is. It's up to you to learn how to do it, to put in the time, to keep going on your hero's journey, obstacle after obstacle, failure after failure, wrong turn after wrong turn. But it's all going to work out at the end, because that's what stories do. That's what it implanted in me. It was a very powerful stroke of lightning. And it has served me very well in life. I've held on to it in a way, not consciously. I don't go back and console myself and say, well, Steve Sondheim cast me in a show, so therefore I must be okay. It was something much deeper than that. And I hope you can understand what I mean. It was like a transformative moment for me. That is the power of mentor energy. And so that's what it taught me. Now, I'm going to pick up the pace of my storytelling now, because so much of what was in my toolkit, you can see it was already quite full. I stayed acting for a little while, but I very quickly said, no. I have like this analytical mind that I developed, why things work, why they don't. And so obviously, am I a writer? No, I was still not considering being a writer. It was not it was not in my consciousness at all that I might do that. I thought, oh, well, I'll be a director, because that's who gets to sort of really make things work. So I directed for a while. And then I fell into studying improv. And this is where things get really interesting, right? Because to study improvisation means that you're studying a bunch of things. You're studying the creative process. How do you make things up? How do people make things up? How do people do it? And what I learned studying improv is that we can all make things up all the time. It's not something that's just something a few people can do. It's not something that's only takes a special talent. Look at these brains. Look at the frontal lobes. We are incredible storytelling machines. We can all make things up all the time. However, if you know story structure, you're going to make up things more easily. And when I say story structure as it pertains to improv, here's what it is. And if you've ever seen an improv show, you know what I'm talking about. There's a character. The character wants something. There's something in their way. Go. Improvise. If you know who you are, right, in what circumstance, and you're trying to get something, you have a motive, a goal, a motivation, as we used to say in acting, and something's in your way, and I say, go. Improvise the scene. Improvise it. You know what to do. What would you do to get that goal, to get to that goal, to do that thing? It's that basic. That is the the structure of a scene, you know. One of the other rules of improv is to add new information in every line, so that if one person in the improv says, well, you know, I can't believe it took us this long to sail to England, the other person doesn't say, yeah, it really took a long time. That's not improv. That's not adding new information. The first person says, I can't believe it took us this long to sail to England. And the second person says, yes, and what luck that we were the only two to survive the shipwreck. That's adding new information. Does this make sense? All right. Adding new information is the storyteller's job. It's something we do in fiction. That's something I learned in improv. I did improv for a few years. I had an incredible time with some hilarious people, but like most improv troupes, when we stumbled upon something that was extra good, we kept it and we turned it into a skit, and we would write comedy sketches, very like SNL, Saturday Night Live, although I like to think we were a little more sophisticated than that. This, my friends, was when it occurred to me that I could write. I'm 30 years old at this point. I have done nothing but try things that didn't work out. So far, I have this enormous imaginary duffel bag full of things that I've learned, but I don't really know what to do with them. I'm just schlepping them around, right? All right. Now I'm a writer. Am I a novelist? No, I have no interest in being a novelist. I did go back to school because I had it in my head that if I'm going to be a writer, I should have an education. By the way, I had dropped out of college to go be in Merrily, so I never got my college degree. I went back to school, so I did end up getting it. But by the time I got my bachelor's degree, I was in my early 30s. My daughter was already born. I was married. I have a graduation picture of myself clutching my toddler in my cap and gown. So just so you know, right? We're talking obstacles. None of this was smooth. None of this was given. It was all hero's journey stuff. Test after test after test. What did I study in college? I studied literature. I read everything that they would give me to read. I finally read Shakespeare. I read the Greek tragedies. I got, I got a sense of the lineage. I got a taste of the lineage of what it meant to be a storyteller. And that is, of course, an ongoing exploration, because there's only so much you can read in college. There's only so much you can read in life. Did I study writing? Yes, I did. I took every screenwriting class. I took every television writing class because I thought in terms of performance. These were the classes I wanted to take. I have one funny story for you. I've enrolled on a whim in a fiction writing class once. And it was the only class that I dropped my entire return to college career. And I dropped it because I went to the first class and there was this darling, somewhat elderly man standing in the front of the class. And he said, with the simplicity of a true sage, although I was too dumb to realize it at the time, he said, storytelling is really, really easy. It's really simple. You have a character, you get them into trouble, and then there's a satisfying ending. That's all it is. And I looked at this guy and I think to myself, trouble, and a satisfying ending? I can't sit through this kind of nonsense for a whole semester. I'm out of here. And I dropped the class. This was the only time in my life that I ever tried to take a class in writing fiction. And I dropped it after one class because I did not understand what the sage was telling me, right? I met the Buddha on the road and I did not recognize him. I hope the irony of this is coming across the internet to you guys, because I laugh every time I think of it. But I studied screenwriting and I studied playwriting and I studied television writing. I studied all the performing forms, and they taught me structure. They did teach me structure. They ended up teaching me in a kind of a less profound way what that darling man would have taught me had I had the sense to take his class. They taught me about acts, and they taught me about scenes, and they taught me about the beats of a scene, and I started to draw together a lot of the things that I knew, and I started to feel that I was going to have a go at this, And when I finished school, I decided that I wanted to go back to my roots, because the thing that I knew best and wanted most to do was just to write musicals. And so I studied musical theater writing after I'd graduated college. And I studied at the BMI Musical Theater Workshop, and they deserve a shout out by name. Now, again, you may wonder, like, how is all of this turning into, like, how do we write fiction? Well, I want to tell you. I want to tell you. One of the things that I got from studying how to write musicals that I had not yet picked up in my magic duffel bag of tools was that musicals are the book, quote unquote, book of a musical, the script of it is like architecture. It's like the musical has dancing in it, it has singing in it, and it has the story. And the story holds it all up, and everything comes from the story. But the story itself is told in as compressed way as possible, because the book of the musical is sort of the least interesting part, right? We come to the musical because we want it to be singing, we want to see the dancing, the story is going to get told through all these forms. The discipline of telling a story in a book scene that can only be a page and a half long, and you've got to move the story forward like, 12 beats. It's such strict discipline, and it taught me to recognize what is storytelling and what isn't. You cannot have an extra syllable in the book of a musical. So it gave me an incredible sense of clarity. It gave me an appreciation for the power of an iconic central character. And when I say iconic, I mean Dolly Levi of Hello Dolly, Auntie Mame of Mame, Hamilton of Hamilton, Sweeney Todd of Sweeney Todd. These are not normal people. They are larger than life figures with larger than life problems. They are compelling. They are unforgettable. And there's something to be said for understanding that the books that we love may be populated with wonderful casts of characters, but the reader comes to us for Jane Eyre, for Bilbo Baggins, right? For Wilbur the pig, for all of the stories that I talk about. There's this unforgettable character at the center who's realer than the people that we know in real life. And that is what can lift a work out of the realm of just another attempt to write a book into the kind of thing that is going to sit on the shelves until somebody decades later is saying, yeah, this book, look, I read it so many times, it's falling out of its bindings, The iconic character. There's also a difference in a musical between what is spoken and what is sung. And that's a kind of a subtlety that is very important in fiction as well, right? Because there are things that are put into scenes and there are things that go on inside the character's head. And I know that all of you are out there with your drafts, and when you go to revise, it's sometimes keeping the right balance between what is performed in the physical world of the storytelling, what is actually said or what is enacted in a scene, versus what your protagonist is processing on the inside. Finding that balance can be tricky, but just know that is something else that was a tremendous thing that I learned from studying musicals. Now, directly, we're right on time. We've got 5 more minutes. I'm going to wrap this up. Directly out of my experience of studying musicals, and I mean directly, I had written a musical. It was winning a lot of prizes, actually won a very prestigious prize called the Richard Rogers Award. And it was, we can call it the scene that was promised, right? The ordeal, the end of the second act, because I had gone on this long, long, long journey, right? I'm now, I guess I'm 40 by now. I'm in my early 40s. I got on this enormous lifetime journey, gathering tools having to do with storytelling, having to do with how to make good art in the narrative forms. And I won these prizes, and the show was getting workshopped. And as what always happens at the end of an ordeal, it didn't go the way I planned. The show, even though the piece had won prizes, things were not moving forward. Productions got canceled. And importantly, I was not making any money at all. Like, really was up against it. And a friend of mine who was in the BMI musical theater workshop was the person who came up with the mentor energy encounter that I needed at that time, and said, have you ever heard of YA fiction? And I was like, no, what's that? And she told me. Now, again, this is going back 18 years or so, maybe 15 to 18 years. Can't remember exactly the year. It's just, when things were kind of new, still a bit Wild West. And we had a conversation and she said, this musical that you keep winning prizes for has a 16-year-old girl protagonist, does it not? I said, yes, it does. And she said, well, so you could write YA. And she encouraged me and she told me what to do. She said, write a proposal for a book and, you know, I'll help you know what to do with it. And from that conversation came, honestly, in a very, very short period of time, my first 2-book deal with Random House. This is where I warned you at the beginning of this talk that I could tell you my story, but this is not a journey that you can replicate. It is so particular. It's so personal, right? And this piece of it obviously is not something that I'm saying that you can replicate. I had never written a novel. I had written so much stuff. You now know I had decades of storytelling experience. I had plays, I had musicals, I had screenplays, all of these things. But I had never written fiction. With one exception, there was that Christmas tree book when I was a kid. I'm sure I must have had to write other things as a kid as well for school. And I think I wrote a short story when I was in college that got put in the college literary magazine. And it was just kind of it was a whim. It was not something I was really interested in doing, but I had an idea. So here I am. And I wrote a proposal for a young adult novel, and I got a 2-book deal with Random House, and I have never written a novel in my life. Now, this is both the third act in a way, right? Because now I am up against it. I have a deadline. I've taken money, which I desperately needed, and I'm living on it, and I have to write a novel. And I look in my duffel bag, my friends, and everything I needed was in there already. I had earned everything I needed to do the hardest thing because I had failed so often for so long along the way and just kept the things that I won each time. And so I was able to begin. I found where I belonged, and I was able to begin writing my first novel, you know, as a book that was already sold. And from that day on, I've written fiction. I have written fiction. I was now, let's see, I was 43 or 44 when that happened. And in the years since then, I have written 16 novels. 14 of them have come out. One of them I just sent in manuscript to my new agent. I have done nothing but write fiction. I have written fiction with tremendous satisfaction and a happy, confident, you know, approach to it. Has my fiction writing gotten better? I'm sure that it has. I hope it has, and I hope it always continues to get better. But the journey that I took to the moment that I began writing fiction had nothing to do with knowing what I was aiming for, and everything to do with just following my desire to express myself fully and authentically as an artist. And that these were the tools that I was gathering all along. Now, I'm not going to say that I didn't also hustle a bit, right? When I came up against okay, here's the good news is you have a book deal. The bad news is you have a deadline. Write a book. I absolutely ran out, grabbed a bunch of craft books about fiction writing and, you know, thought a lot about what I was doing and tried to sort things out. And honestly, the first novel that I wrote it needed a revision, and I got editorial notes from my editor, and I did a substantial rewrite. My later novels, my more recent novels, get turned in pretty solid because I have the experience now. But I do remember the great compliment of turning in that very first book in revision and having the editor say, I can't believe how you revised this. She goes, mostly I give notes and they come back and the writers haven't done that much. I said, I was in Merrily We Roll Along. You rewrite the whole thing until it works. What are you talking about? It didn't occur to me that the book was like that. Her telling me it needed a substantial rewrite. You know, I had to yank out whole sections and eliminate characters and just do one of those kinds of rewrites that makes you scared, like that you're going to tear the whole thing apart. I was like, of course, I've seen Stephen Sondheim do this. I know what to do. I could do it. I'm not scared, you know? And she was so impressed by that. And she was so pleased by it. So even though I did run out and I got all the craft books and I thought about fiction and blah, 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 the tools that I needed were in that were in that bag I was dragging along. They were in there. They were absolutely in there. So I let me just quickly wrap up, because the one thing that I started to do as well, someplace along in this third act of my journey, right, which of course is a whole new adventure as well. We have multiple heroes' journeys in our lives, kind of as part of it, right? And then there's the big one. So my career as a novelist is kind of my third act, and it is also kind of a whole new adventure, you know. But it was really evident to me. This was partly because of how I was starting to get the long view of how I had gotten where I had gotten, and what was important in my own work is that I wanted to be a mentor, that I wanted to teach. And so I took that on, and I took it on, you know, the way one does. I looked at the closest school to where I lived, and I called them up and I said, can I teach? Can I teach? And this was a public college in the Bronx in New York City. And they were so thrilled that, you know, that a published author wanted to come in and teach their students. And that's where I started teaching. And I taught there for a while. Then I taught at NYU for a while. I've taught lots of places, you know. But to me, the blossoming of the mentor within me, that was the appropriate next step. That's what a hero does. The hero gets to the end of their journey, and then they become the mentor for the heroes who are coming up, you know. And I feel that that is an incredibly fulfilling component to a successful hero's journey as well. At the end of a hero's journey structure, and I know you guys have heard me talk about this, it's not just that the hero got what they wanted. It's that somehow the stuff that they earned along the way, the suffering that they went through, brings a benefit that is not just about them. It has to be offered to the larger world. And so I want you guys to know that that is, to me, also very much part of my journey, that I believe that to be the case. That's why I started the Path of the Storyteller program, so that even though nobody out there can replicate the insane journey that I had, I'm not telling all of you, okay, well, spend 10 years being an actor, spend 10 years, do some improv, go study musical theater. That's not what I'm telling you to do. What I'm encouraging all of you to consider is that your journey is going to be unique. And that the fact that you hit obstacle after obstacle after obstacle is in no way a sign to stop. It is not a stop sign. That is a green light. You're filling up your bag. You're gathering all the tools you need to keep moving forward toward your mission, your fulfillment. You can't be afraid to go after it. Now, one of the things that I can do as a mentor is you can skip all the nutty stuff that I had to do. I can just open my toolkit for you. I can open it up. And I can show you all the things that I learned the hard way. And I can try to, as best I can, speed up your journey so that it doesn't take decades. I'm grateful, and I wouldn't change a thing. I would not change a thing. But I also can see from my work with students and my work as a teacher that so much of what I learned the hard way, if you will, or the long way, are exactly the kinds of things that writers who have not had the access to good training, they don't even know to ask these questions. They're not looking at these things. There's a lot to look at in story structure and writing craft. There's a great deal to look at. All of it is stuff that you can learn. But if you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if you look at the syllabus of the Path of the Storyteller program, you can see, oh, that's that. There it is. All of the things that writers need to be familiar with and to know how to do in order to put them together in the very complex practice of writing good fiction. So that program is built on what I learned. Every hero needs a mentor. You cannot figure out this stuff on your own, but by the same token, it doesn't need to take you 25 years of accidents to do it. So, so this brings us back into the present. Me on YouTube every Wednesday, trying to shine some mentor energy out into the world. I hope this talk has been of benefit to you guys. It was a fun exercise for me to revisit it. I'm very grateful to I know she's here. I think she's here in the comments. Um, oh, Priscilla, yes, I think you're here. So, as for asking the question that prompted this talk, and I hope it's a benefit, and I hope it gives you something to think about your own development as a creative artist. And I just want to encourage you as well. If I have that ability, I don't know if I do, but I hope that I do, to impress upon you the way it was kind of magically impressed upon me, that you do have a seat at the table. If you're called to do this, that's telling you that you're part of this tradition. You're part of this tradition. It's a community of makers, of storytellers that goes back thousands of years. Storytelling is part of being human, and it continues to be an essential practice, not just because it gives us pleasure, because let's face it, it's a lot of hard work. Fundamentally, it's because the stories that we then can put into the world help our readers feel seen, feel understood, feel that life has meaning. The crafting of good stories is one of the ways that human beings start to perceive how life has meaning. You can tell from my personal hero's journey that so much of the meaning of it all is not evident until you're far enough into it that you can look back a little bit and see the patterns. And it's very stressful when you're younger, particularly, but at any age, to not see any patterns and to say, no, none of this has meaning. It's just me not getting what I want. It's just me failing. It's just me hitting obstacles. And to start inventing narratives about, well, see, I didn't have the right kind of upbringing. I didn't have the right kind of education. I've never had the right kind of luck. Maybe I wasn't gifted with the right kind of talent. All of these things that we say to ourselves that are simply not true. I'm giving you a little biscuit of mentor energy right now. Of course you have a seat at the table. Of course you should do this. Of course you should do the work. If you are interested in availing yourself of some mentorship energy on an ongoing basis in a formal training program, by all means, come on and visit me at pathofthestoryteller.com/enroll. You'll see all of the things. You'll see all of the contents of my little toolkit. You're going to see them all. It's all exposed to you. And you can always, there's a way to reach out to me on the website. You can always email me with your questions. I'm going to be sending out emails all week long to people who are interested in the program. And I hope you'll really consider it. Okay. Thank you for sharing this time with me. And I hope it's given you something to think about. I will see you next week.